discovering the truth behind ghost soldiers. In the final, desperate year of World War II, as Allied armies pushed relentlessly toward the heart of Germany, the front lines were a brutal, unforgiving meat grinder. Every inch of ground was paid for in blood. Intelligence was everything. Knowing the enemy's strength and where they were was the key to survival, the key to victory. German commanders were famous for their tactical skill. They meticulously tracked Allied movements, analyzing aerial photos, intercepting radio traffic, and listening to spies. They felt confident in their assessments, positioning their panzer divisions and infantry to meet the next big attack. But they were about to be confronted by an enemy they couldn't possibly comprehend. An enemy that defied all logic. In March of 1945, German intelligence spotted 2 American infantry divisions, a massive force of 30,000 men with all their equipment, massing for a huge assault across the Rhine River. Alarmed, German commanders shifted their precious, dwindling troops to meet this overwhelming threat, bracing for a bloody, decisive battle. But here's the thing, the thousands of soldiers they were preparing to fight weren't real. They were nothing more than ghosts. This is the incredible story of the Ghost Army, a top-secret U.S. Army unit of artists, designers, and engineers who used inflatable tanks, sound effects, and pure theatrical nerve to pull off one of the most clever deceptions in the history of war. Their mission was so secret, its very existence was kept under wraps for more than 50 years. The year is 1944. The D-Day landings were a success, but it's a fragile victory. The Allies have a foothold in Normandy, but ahead of them lies a fortress, a continent held by a determined and dug-in German army. The push across France and into Germany was going to be a monumental task. The Allied High Command was facing a grim calculation. The casualty rates were staggering. Every offensive, every river crossing, every push was projected to cost thousands of lives. The Germans, fighting on defense, could inflict horrific losses. General Dwight D. Eisenhower and his strategists were desperate for an edge, any advantage that could reduce the awful human cost of the war. They needed to be able to concentrate their forces for a powerful punch, but doing that would leave other parts of their line dangerously thin. If German intelligence figured out where the main attack was coming from, they could move their reserves, counterattack, and potentially turn a planned offensive into a total catastrophe. The Allies had to find a way to make the Germans look the wrong way. To make them commit their powerful panzer divisions to fight phantoms, while the real Allied armies struck somewhere else, against a much weaker defense. The British had already shown how powerful military deception could be. During Operation Bertram at El Alamein in 1942, they used thousands of dummy tanks and camouflaged gear to fool Rommel about the timing and location of their attack, a turning point in the North African campaign. This success got the attention of a few forward-thinking American officers in London. They started to wonder, could this idea be taken even further? Could they create a dedicated unit, not just for one big deception, but as a mobile, tactical force? A sort of repertory theater of war, able to stage a new show every week, wherever it was needed. A unit that could literally conjure armies out of thin air. This was the impossible problem. How to fool an entire army, not just once, but over and over again, in the fast-moving chaos of the European front. The solution would be one of the most creative and unusual units the U.S. Army ever put together. The answer to this challenge was officially designated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, activated on January 20, 1944. But they would go down in history by a much more fitting name, the Ghost Army. The unit was the brainchild of 2 American military planners in London, Colonel Billy Harris and Major Ralph Ingersoll. They were a real odd couple. Harris was a disciplined, by-the-book West Point graduate. Ingersoll, on the other hand, was a celebrity journalist, the former managing editor of The New Yorker, and a best-selling author someone once called a prodigiously energetic egotist. Ingersoll was the wild idea guy, inspired by the British deceptions. Harris was the pragmatist who figured out how to actually make those ideas work. Together, they sold the top brass on a radical concept, a unit of just 1,100 men that could impersonate a force of 30,000. But who do you recruit for a mission this strange? You don't go to the infantry schools or the armored corps. Instead, the army tapped a completely different talent pool. They started scouring art schools in New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. They cherry-picked men from advertising agencies, theater stage crews, and sound engineering studios. This wasn't your typical platoon of GIs. The 23rd was filled with painters, illustrators, architects, set designers, sound technicians, and actors. Among them were men who would later become famous in their own right. A young corporal named Bill Blass spent his downtime sketching fashion designs. He'd go on to become a world-renowned fashion icon. A fellow soldier remembered Blass being impeccably stylish even in a foxhole, reading Vogue for inspiration. Another soldier, Ellsworth Kelly, would become a celebrated minimalist painter. Arthur Singer, a future wildlife artist, and Art Kane, who would become a legendary fashion and music photographer, were also part of this eclectic crew. These guys were creative thinkers, problem solvers, and masters of illusion. Their mission wasn't to fight, but to fool. As one of their officers, Lieutenant Fred Fox, later wrote in a memo, "There is too much military and not enough showmanship. We must remember that we are playing to a very critical and attentive radio, ground, and aerial audience. They must all be convinced." The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was divided into 4 distinct parts, a symphony of deception ready to take their show on the road. The 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion handled the visual tricks. The 3132nd Signal Service Company Special took care of sonic deception. Another signal company handled spoof radio. And providing security, and a bit of realism, was the 406th Engineer Combat Company. Together, these unlikely heroes would wield an arsenal not of bullets and shells, but of rubber, sound waves, and pure imagination. The Ghost Army's weapons were unlike anything else on the battlefield. They weren't designed to destroy, but to deceive. Their whole operation was a carefully choreographed performance, a multisensory illusion staged for an audience of one, the German military. And this performance rested on 4 pillars. First up, and probably the most famous part of their toolkit, was visual deception, run by the 603rd Camouflage Engineers. Their star players were a fleet of inflatable decoys. These weren't crude dummies, they were meticulously crafted replicas of Sherman tanks, self-propelled guns, trucks, and even planes. Made by rubber companies in the U.S., like Goodyear, they were basically giant rubber balloons. A 30-ton Sherman tank became a 93-pound rubber bladder that 4 men could carry and inflate in minutes. The men would arrange these rubber armies in convincing formations, and then, and this is the clever part, they'd camouflage them just poorly enough so that enemy spy planes would spot the hidden division and report it back to headquarters. To really sell it, men from the 406th Engineers would use bulldozers to carve fake tank tracks into the ground. They were, in essence, battlefield set designers. The second pillar was sonic deception. An army of 30,000 men makes a whole lot of noise, and the Germans knew it. To fake this, the 3132nd Signal Service Company Special was equipped with state-of-the-art sound technology. They had spent months back at Fort Knox recording every clank, rumble, and shout of real armored and infantry divisions. They edited these into a library of sound effects, pressed them onto records, and brought them to the front. In the field, they'd mount massive, 500-pound speakers on half-tracks and blast these sounds across the countryside, often at night. The sound was so powerful it could be heard up to 15 miles away. So, they might play the sounds of a tank column arriving in an area at night, and in the morning, German observers would see a field full of freshly arrived, inflatable tanks. It was psychological warfare of the highest order. Third was radio deception, or spoof radio. German intelligence listened constantly to radio traffic to locate and identify Allied units. Every division had a unique radio signature, and every Morse code operator has a distinctive fist, their own personal rhythm of keying. The Ghost Army Signal Company became masters of mimicry. They would study the radio patterns of the real division they were supposed to impersonate. Then, when the Real division went silent and moved out, the Ghost Army would take over their frequency and start broadcasting phony radio traffic. They'd invent problems, report fake troop movements, and create all the boring chatter of a division headquarters, convincing German listeners that the unit was still right where it was. The final element was what the men called atmospherics. This was pure theater. To support the rubber tanks and recorded sounds, the men of the Ghost Army would physically impersonate other soldiers. They'd sew the shoulder patches of a specific division onto their uniforms and drive their jeeps into nearby French towns. They'd hang out in cafes, spreading rumors for any local spies to overhear. They'd even put up fake road signs for the phony division. This human element was crucial. The soldiers had to be convincing actors, knowing that a slip-up could not only blow the mission but could get them killed. Their lives, and the lives of thousands of other soldiers, depended on the quality of their performance. Armed with their one-of-a-kind arsenal, the Ghost Army conducted more than 20 deception operations between their arrival in France in 1944 and the end of the war. Each one was a high-stakes performance, often taking place just miles from the front lines. In September 1944, they conducted Operation Bettembourg in Luxembourg. During the Allied push toward Germany, a section of General Patton's Third Army front line was dangerously thin, a huge gap with almost no one defending it. The Ghost Army was rushed in to plug it, not with men and guns, but with illusion. For over a week, they used their inflatables and sound trucks to pretend they were a powerful armored division, convincing the Germans that the line was heavily defended. They successfully scared off a German attack on that weak point. But their grand finale, their most dramatic and important performance, was Operation Viersen in March 1945. The Allies were ready to cross the Rhine River, the last great natural barrier protecting Germany. The U.S. Ninth Army was tasked with a major crossing, and everyone knew casualties would be immense. The Ghost Army was given its most critical mission yet: draw the German reserves away from the Ninth Army's actual crossing point. The plan was incredibly audacious. The 1,100 men of the Ghost Army would impersonate two entire U.S. infantry divisions, the 30th and the 79th, a combined force of over 30,000 men. The show was set to take place about 10 miles south of where the Real crossing would happen. Spoof radio nets crackled to life, reporting the movement of the two divisions. Then, the physical show began. The Ghost Army deployed hundreds of inflatable tanks, cannons, and vehicles, arranging them in assembly areas visible to German planes. At night, their sound trucks blasted the sounds of arriving convoys. During the day, they played recordings of heavy construction to suggest they were building bridges for the crossing. To add a terrifying touch of realism, they even set off flash canisters to simulate artillery fire, deliberately drawing real German artillery in response. Shells rained down on the phony assembly areas, ripping through the rubber tanks. The Ghost Army soldiers would wait for the barrage to end, then run out to patch up the damaged tanks, ready for the next act. The Germans took the bait completely. Enemy divisions were spotted moving to face the Phantom Army. On the night of March 24, 1945, miles to the north, the real Ninth Army began its crossing. They met with shockingly light resistance. The German forces that should have been there were miles away, staring at a field of balloons and listening to a recording. The crossing was a stunning success, with an astonishingly low number of casualties. General Simpson, the Ninth Army's commander, was so impressed he formally commended the unit, praising their careful planning, minute attention to detail, and diligent execution. It was the Ghost Army's masterpiece. The impact of the Ghost Army was profound. In over 20 operations, this small unit of 1,100 men successfully fooled the German army again and again. Military analysts estimate their deceptions saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American soldiers' lives, a staggering number that speaks to their bravery and ingenuity. As one declassified Army report put it, rarely, if ever, has there existed a group of such few men, which had so great an influence on the outcome of a major military campaign. Yet, for decades, their story was completely unknown. When the war ended, the men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were sworn to secrecy. Their mission and their methods were classified as top secret. They went back to their lives, unable to tell their families or friends about what they really did in the war. Why the secrecy? The Cold War was just beginning, and the Army wanted to keep the option of using these brilliant deception tactics against the Soviet Union. The story of the Ghost Army simply vanished. The silence was finally broken when the records were declassified in 1996. Slowly, the incredible story began to emerge, first in articles, and then in a 2013 PBS documentary. For the veterans, many then in their 70s and 80s, it was a long overdue acknowledgement. Finally, in 2024, the Ghost Army received one of the nation's highest honors. On March 21, 2024, surviving members of the unit were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal at the U.S. Capitol. It was the culmination of a nearly decade-long fight for recognition. As of the ceremony, 3 of the 7 known surviving veterans, all around 100 years old, were there to accept the honor for all their comrades who served, and especially for those who never lived to see their story told. It was a powerful, emotional moment, a final, public validation for the artists and engineers who fought a different kind of war. Section 6, The Other Ghost Soldiers. The story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops is a tale of heroic, life-saving deception. But in the decades since World War II, the term ghost soldiers has taken on a second, much darker meaning. It's now a byword for a specific and destructive type of military corruption seen all over the world. In this context, a ghost soldier is a name on a military payroll who doesn't actually exist. They are phantom troops, invented by corrupt commanders to skim salaries and benefits for themselves. This practice has had devastating consequences, hollowing out national armies from the inside and leading directly to catastrophic failures. You might have even seen this play out in the news, most infamously in Afghanistan. For years, the U.S. and its allies poured billions of dollars into the Afghan National Army. But huge amounts of that money were lost to corruption. Commanders would list fake soldiers on their rosters and pocket their pay. In some areas, it was estimated that up to 40% of the soldiers on the books were ghosts. So when the Taliban launched its final offensive in 2021, the Afghan army, which looked huge on paper, collapsed with shocking speed. Units that were supposed to have hundreds of men often had only dozens. A similar crisis unfolded in Iraq during the fight against ISIS, where the Iraqi military was found to have as many as 50,000 ghost soldiers on its payrolls. This corruption was a major reason the army collapsed in 2014, allowing ISIS to conquer huge parts of the country. This isn't a new problem, either. It's been documented in countries from Uganda to Colombia and even during the Vietnam War. This modern definition of ghost soldiers stands in stark, tragic contrast to the heroes of World War II. The original Ghost Army used deception to save lives and help win a war. This new kind of ghost soldier represents a deception that destroys national security, enriches the corrupt, and ultimately costs lives. It's a sobering reminder that the same words can represent both the peak of military ingenuity and the depths of military decay. The hidden history of World War II is filled with incredible stories just like this one. If you think the secret history of the Ghost Army is as fascinating as I do, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the shadows of the past. And let us know in the comments, what other little-known story from history do you think deserves to be told? The legacy of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops is more than just a collection of clever tricks. It's a testament to a different kind of courage. These men were placed in extreme danger, often operating with minimal protection, armed with little more than their wits and their imagination. They proved that sometimes, the most powerful weapon in a war isn't a bigger tank or a faster plane, but a brilliant idea. They were the combat con artists, the masters of illusion, the showmen of the front lines. They were the Ghost Army, and their performance, once shrouded in secrecy, has finally taken its rightful place in the spotlight of history.